Hi, can one form submission update multiple tables at once? In Grist, the form data actually usually lands in a one big messy list. But what if we wanted to split the data? So, for example, you might have a form that captures some user information, and you want to put this data, this contact information, into a separate table, like here in the contacts table, and leave the forms admissions in a second table. Today I will show you how to automate this. I will use a summer camp as an example. So imagine that parents are filling a registration form for their kids for a summer camp. Summer camp has multiple sessions they can choose for, but they also need to provide the kid's name, their email, phone, and age. So the problem is simple that we want to have. We have here, so we don't want to have big data with all the contacts information living there duplicated. We just want to have a nice UI, a nice structure where contacts live in one table and the form submissions live into another, and they are all connected via reference key so that we don't duplicate data unnecessary. Let me show you how it works. So I will fill out my details, use some real email, provide some phone, age, of course the age of a kid, not mine, select a week and press submit. So as you can see, after form is submitted, we have a record in the admissions table with a correct reference key to the contacts table, and contact table is also filled in. And the data that actually was submitted sits in a dedicated table that is in the back of the form, and we can just treat it as a log of events what has happened to the form. But this is like a temporary data, we can just remove it or just treat it as an admin log. But our admissions have nice structure, they have contact and camp session, both actually a reference key to different tables, one to contacts and one to session. And in a moment we'll see how this actually can be built using n8n. Okay, before jumping into n8n, we need to first figure out how to send data from our system to the n8n. n8n is actually a workflow engine that can just receive some data, act upon it, and send the data back. So in our example, we'll use this to split the data that was submitted by the form into two tables. And how to tell Grist document to actually send the data or inform n8n that something needs to be changed. So Grist document has something that is called webhooks. So webhook is an endpoint that we can call with some payload, with some data. In this example, this is just a record of a form with all the data that user submitted. And it just is an HTTP endpoint. So if you are familiar a little bit with how web platforms work, so this is just an HTTP endpoint that we will need to send a post request with a payload that has all the data we needed. To create this kind of webhook, we just need to go to the document settings page, scroll down a little bit, and there is in the API section, there is a section called webhooks. You can open it. And I already, of course, configured one for this demo. And this is basically where you create a webhook and provide it with a URL that Grist should call. Basically, the URL where Grist will send the data that was submitted. And in our case, this is our URL of our workflow. The adding webhooks is very straightforward. You just create, give it a name, submissions 2, select a table, we have forms, for example, select the event type, we want to have add, and we just paste the URL and enable it, and that's all. Webhook will be available. Of course, I don't want to create now a second webhook, so the one above is enough. Now let's jump to an n8n part and see how the n8n workflow is actually built. Before we jump into it, first a few words about the platform and what it actually is. So it is a workflow automation tool. You build workflows basically by connecting nodes together. So each node does only one thing. It receives some data, in our case JSON data, on left side, like in an input, transforms it in somehow, or just decides if it is worth dealing with, and then emits it on the right side as an output. And your job as a workflow designer is just to connect those nodes together to achieve what you want. As you might see, those are the nodes. Some of them have the Grist logo. And those are nodes that n8n has built in, and that was provided by n8n team, which allows you to talk with Grist. It basically allows you to read or write data to Grist. You can add this block by just looking in the catalog of all the nodes and select the block and the action that this block should do. So in this case, we can create, delete, read, or update rows. Okay, so let's maybe talk a little bit about each node from high level without going deep dive into it. How this workflow works. So first, each workflow starts with a trigger. In our case, this is a webhook trigger. So this is basically an endpoint that n8n exposes for over the internet for someone, in our case Grist document, to call. When we receive this call from this HTTP request from Grist, we first need to split the payload, because Grist won't send individual records, it will send a bunch of records in that table that triggered the change. And it will try to actually combine multiple items together if they happen to be changed or added simultaneously or as a single action. So because the webhook will contain like a list of items, we need to split it in order to have this pipeline flow. So this is the first item. Next is a node that just transforms those items into nicer form that is much easier to use later on. Next, we need to enrich the data. So basically, for each row submission, we need to find an existing contact in our table and add the ID of this contact to this item that goes through the pipeline, or just don't add it at all if we don't find it. So this is those three blocks that are doing that. Next, we are just checking if we have managed to find the contact in our table. If we managed to do that, we are just creating the admissions in the admission table. And if not, we are first creating the contact and then creating the admission. So from high level, this is pretty simple flow. Now let's talk a little bit in more details for every single node. So let's start with the first node. This is a webhook node. I will open it up. So this is very simple node. It is just a starting trigger of each of this workflow. It has an URL, a test URL for you to test using the editor, and a production URL. Right now, Grist document is connected to a production URL, so we'll change it and to the test URL to actually see live how the data flows in the pipeline. So let me copy this URL from here and just replace it here. And that's enough for this part. And now going back to this node, we can actually test this node, how it works. For this there is a button that will for a moment expose this endpoint on the web, and if we do some submission, let's keep a new name, let's submit it. So as you can see, nothing happened here because this is just a test endpoint, but this node actually was able to receive the data, and you can see what actually was sent from Grist to n8n. And the interesting part is, of course, the body element, which is an array of rows that were added. As I said previously, it is actually form is also available through the API endpoint, so someone can just submit multiple forms at a time, or multiple forms can be submitted at the same time. So that's why we have just a single endpoint, and we need to then split it up into multiple items. One trick that is very important to remember and know, each node can actually pin the output. So as I said previously, each node is a box that converts input from the output, but if we don't want to execute each block, which can actually call some external systems or wait for the webhooks, we can just pin the data. This is the button in the right top corner. And what this does is actually puts the item on the output node. So next node, if we want to execute the next node and it expects some input, the input will be already there because it is pinned to the output of the previous node. Next node is a split items. Let me maybe just run it so you can see how it works. So it took the body that was passed as the payload of the REST item, and it just split it, the whole array into multiple items. We can actually test if that works by changing a little bit this item. So n8n fortunately allows us to just change it. Let's just simulate that there was like a third row submission with a new record. Let's say this is new 1 and new 2. Let's save it, and now when we run this, you can see that we just split those big array, like small array for now, into 2 items. And so this is basically the split items node. Next node is a prepare variables node. It is not strictly necessary, but I like to add it because it allows me to just name, move, map output to input in more natural way, because some nodes actually have the function for auto mapping. So if the field names of the items that are moved between nodes match together, it's just much easier and much quicker to do. So I'm basically here mapping one structure to another. We can actually, because we have those 2 items waiting in the pipeline, we can execute this item on both of them sequentially, and you can see there is a nicer way to represent it that might be useful for next nodes. So one thing that might not be as obvious as it might be, so the way the workflow executes is that it basically applies each node to every item in the pipeline. So this is not that there are 2 items pushed together to this node. No, this node is actually executed for each item. Then there we have a split. So we are actually inputting each item that this node produces simultaneously to 2 nodes. The upper part is our way of expressing the need to actually retrieve the data from Grist. So find the contact by the email and put the ID to the item, to the form item that we received from the webhook. So as you may see in this pipeline, in this moment in the pipeline, the form, the data that we have is just a raw data, like a bare data from the form. It just have name, phone, camp session, and email. But what we want to have is the ID of a contact to actually check later on if this contact exists in contact tables, contact table or not. So we will use Grist node for doing that. One Grist node has many four operations. One of those is get many rows, and we can just filter it by email. Of course, we assume that contact table doesn't have duplicates. Otherwise, we would need to have remove those duplicates later on. So we can actually execute this row and see what will happen. As you can see, nothing happened because we received two items. Like in the life cycle of this workflow, will be invoked 2 times. And this is like a preview of the last item that was sent. And of course, we don't have currently contact that it has this email. That's why this node doesn't produce any output. If the output would be produced, then we would actually then need to merge those two fields together. And to merge this the data, so the ID of the contact with the form record, we'll use the merge data block. And this, you can think about it as doing left or right join. So it basically enriches one of the inputs of that we provide to this node. So in our case, merge data has 2 inputs. On the second input, we have all the items from the raw data, and on the first input, we have contact ID, or we don't have contact ID. So we are just doing left or right join. If you are familiar with SQL language, in this case, we are doing right join to just add ID to all the records that came through the pipe that is called input 2. So if we run it, you can see that it actually executed successfully. And here we are just now combining those two together. So for example, if I press here, when I execute this workflow, let me execute it, you can see that it went upper branch. It got 2 items. We don't have those contacts yet in the table, so it just merged with nothing, and it just pushed those 2 items to the next block. Now we have just an if block. If block is very easy. We can also execute it. It just checks if the ID is there or not. So if you execute it, you're just testing if the previous record was enriched or not. So you can use this operator. This is still undefined, so this editor shows you in red, but that's a valid value. And this is a valid operator that's just to check if the number is empty or not. You can actually maybe use different, but it doesn't matter. So when I will execute it, and then there are, from the if node, there are 2 outputs, one on the true branch, one on the false branch. So in this case, both contacts don't exist, so we are going on the lower branch. We are first removing duplicates because the same person can actually send the same 2 admissions on the same email, and we want to have just 1 contact created inside Grist. So we remove duplicates. just using the remove duplicate block, which is actually called remove duplicates. We just specify the field to check for the duplicate values. And after making sure that the items are not duplicated, so as you can see, it would produce two items. We'll just create those two contacts in the table. So we can just move for now. Let's remove, clear everything, and just run this node. So as you can see, it just ran this node and it just created those two contacts, and it stopped, so it didn't actually create the submission. And then we are actually doing the same thing. So we are enriching the upper value, so doing the left join. So we are adding the ID of a new contact to this record field. And once that is merged, we are just combining those two items. This is basically not needed, but it's much easier to think about it this way. So when we execute this workflow, together we know how many items are put it inside the last block, which is actually creating the admission. So to how we actually are talking with Grist. So this is the one of the example of the block that talks with Grist. It has 4 operations, as I said. It requires document ID, which you need to paste it here, either as an expression or as a text. When you are self-hosting or you're having a pro account, you can actually specify it in the variable store on the workflow. I'm here on the free team site, free site on the cloud, so I don't have this available. So I'm just hard coding it here. Next, you just need to select the table ID. Once you select it, you will have a nice auto completion here that you can select which fields to use. So in this case, we are just specifying that we want to create a new admission record. Contact is the ID that we received or created, and the camp session ID, which is the actually the text value from the forum. So if we execute this, we have the response from this, is actually response from the Grist that it created third and fourth record in the submission table, admission table. So now let me talk a bit about permissions. So in here we are actually need only permissions, like create some credentials in this example to connect with Grist. To do that, there is a section that this block is basically already pre-configured, so it knows how to talk with Grist, and it basically needs only your API key. So to create a new API key, you just go to the credentials tab, which will be empty if you just start, create new credential, paste your API key, which I have already done, and just save it. Then you will be able to select the Grist account in every Grist block that you have, which is tightly coupled, which is connected with your account. Just to do a quickly recap, whenever form is submitted, webhook from Grist, some event trigger from Grist document is executed. It calls an endpoint, API endpoint, which we call a webhook on n8n cloud. This start this workflow in this node. First, we are actually splitting the payload to have a separate items. We prepare those items. Each item we add a contact ID to it to know if we need to create contact or not. If we failed with adding the contact ID, we are adding the contact to the contacts table and putting the ID back into the record field. And if there was a contact, we are just going straight to the admissions creation phase. And we just basically merge all the pipelines together and invoke create admissions record. Every time the n8n workflow executes, you can see the execution log in the execution tabs. With this icon, it means that it was a test execution. Without this icon, it means that it was a production execution. And you can just examine every invocation of every past invocation, and you can even go to each node and see what data there was, what was actually mapped from input to output. So in this case, this input, this payload, that rough HTTP and JSON data that was sent from the Grist that contained body element with array with a list of records that were submitted, and we are splitting it into two. And you can see from the last thing which records were actually created as a result. And you can see all the hard-coded elements, all the values of our last element, and you can see the table of elements that were put as the input and the table of elements that were put as an output. Okay, so I think that's all. And from here on, you can actually extend this workflow in many different ways, like sending an email, like a confirmation email that your admission was recorded. When you can actually add some acceptance workflow and send another email that you are actually accepted on the summer camp. You can send another email or generate like a PDF with submission details that user can print and then bring with them to the summer camp. So everything is actually possible now that you know how to connect and automate Grist with n8n. Thanks for watching and see you next time.